Okay, we're going to get started. Hello and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Lighthouse Technologies. The topic of today's webinar is True North Testing. Keep your projects on course with a metrics-based methodology. My name is Lindsay Wilanzik and I'm the marketing coordinator here at Lighthouse. Before we begin today, I do want to go over a few housekeeping issues. We are recording today's webinar, but everyone is on mute, so don't worry if you're eating your lunch, we can't hear you. Questions will be fielded after the presentation, so if you do have a question, please type it into the chat with the presenter box on the left side of your screen, and feel free to ask whatever you would like, from questions about the webinar to what Jeff's favorite color is. We're happy to answer. And if you are having technical problems, please use the chat to notify us, and we will try our best to remedy the situation so you can attend and enjoy. And with that, I'm going to introduce our presenters. Our first presenter is Jeff Van Fleet. He is the president and CEO here at Lighthouse. He has 30-plus years of software QA experience, and he is an expert in QA processes and systems.
Are you using air quotes with expert?
I am.
Good.
Yes. I wouldn't. Yeah. Take it with a grain of salt. And Julie Hagan is also going to be presenting. She is the senior practice manager here at Lighthouse. She has 20-plus years of software industry experience, and she excels in tailoring processes to a metrics-driven, risk-based methodology. Say that 5 times fast.
And with that, she's younger than Jeff.
And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Jeff Van Fleet, and there we go. Jeff, take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. Glad you're all joining us today. I see people are still dialing in as we're going, but it's interesting. We got folks, I think, from California to Connecticut connected in with us today. So welcome, everybody. I guess good morning to you folks out in California. Today, just kind of give a quick overview of what agenda we're going to cover today. We're going to do an overview of how software projects get off course, just so we ground ourselves. And it's a phrase that we've developed here at Lighthouse. We call it the 3 Perils of Software Development. Then we're going to talk about a testing methodology. And then we're going to move into how you apply a metrics-based methodology. And we'll use our methodology as an example for you, but just so you learn a few things along the way, and we'll have a few pop-ups along the way just so you can take some notes and walk away from today's webinar with some real actionable things that you can even do later today or tomorrow to help your organization. And then we'll talk about how you get started in applying the metrics into your methodology. I tell you what, we're going to get started here with a poll for all of you, and it's really a question of, do you currently track do you currently track planned and actual metrics today? Okay, so press the yes, no button if you would. The key is planned and actual metrics. I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to respond, and looks like most people are kind of responded in now. So interestingly, looks like 60% of you have responded that you do track both planned and actual metrics, which is fantastic. Most of the folks we talk with, frankly, track actual metrics. Very few track plan, and very few actually compare plan to actual. So generally, we see that number more like in the 25 to 30% range. So the fact that you, at the 60% of you are doing it, I think is fantastic. So, so great job, really. So what I want to start with is just understanding kind of where you are. So look at these 3 questions, and any of us have been in the industry for any length of time. Apparently, I've been there longer than Julie.
Remember, I'm younger.
We've seen projects, especially enterprise projects, go awry, and they're related to things like defects that drive project costs up, or project delays, or cost overruns on projects. And if you've seen these kind of things, we're hopeful that the discussion today will help resonate with you and frankly help you in some way. So how do software projects get blown off course? Again, we're just kind of setting the stage so everybody understands and we're all grounded at the same conversation level. We have a phrase that we use here at Lighthouse called the 3 Perils of Software Development that is really about defects and delays and dollars. So same 3 things we asked questions about earlier. We've been in business 16 years, but we've talked with hundreds of people and organizations, executives, software testers, developers, test managers, directors, CIOs, users, and we've done assessments of a lot of organizations. And in those conversations, and we talk about the problem that people are facing, the problems that people facing. It resulted in a pattern to us, and this pattern boils down to this thing we call these 3 perils. So today we want this webinar to be educational and pragmatic, frankly, for you. So if you've got questions, as Lindsay said earlier, please pop your questions up during the presentation, and we'll be sure to answer questions near the end of the presentation. We're going to just briefly cover through these 3 perils. We actually have other webinars that go into a lot more detail to try to ground everybody. But in doing that, let me move forward to really the concept of defects, right? Most of us are in QA or software testing, I think, that are on the line. So the concept of defects is very clear to us. But it's really that we as people inject defects, and we do it through the entire development life cycle. So it's from the users up front trying to figure out what they want the system to do or what new enhancement they want the system to do, and their ability or inability to articulate that, to BAs writing the functional specs or user stories, to developers and to testers. We all inject defects, right? And the issue isn't so much that we inject defects, it's that we don't always find them when they were injected. So they end up leaking from one work product to the next. So if you're an agile shop, right, they might leak from your user stories into design, into code. And it's that leaking that we use the phrase leaking, right, that we're going to talk about, because those defects, when they leak from one phase to the next or one work product to the next, they cause rework. And it's unplanned rework. So it's not going to be in your schedule, it's not going to be in your budget, and it's going to impact the organization. And it costs a lot of money to identify and fix this unplanned rework.
And sometimes, like, not only do we not find them, we're not even looking for them sometimes.
Right.
Until much later than we actually should be. So we'll be talking about that a little bit as well.
Good point. And in our research through the years, what we've discovered is that those defects, when they leak from one work product to the next, cost 5 times more to find and fix once they've leaked. So if they leak again to the next phase, now it's 25 times more than had you spent the time to find and remove those defects earlier in the life cycle. Okay, so key concept, we dig into that a whole lot more in other webinars, but just to ground everybody, this is real, it's just not made up stuff. Everybody gets a sense it costs more, but it frankly costs a lot more. And in fact, if a requirement or user story defect leaks to production, we've actually measured it in customers' systems where that one defect now costs $30,000. And you can imagine if there were 100 defects that were requirements defects that leak the whole way to production, it's going to cost $3 million to find and fix them because of all of the hassles that go on when those defects leak. Let's slide into the second peril. Let's call it delays. And it's really related to this unplanned rework again, right? So you have these defects that leaked, but now I had time that I've got to go spend to fix and redo things. So if I'm in the testing phase and I find a bug that was actually injected during the design phase, that means the design is wrong and the code is wrong, and we've got to go rework both the design and the code. And that's the rework, just something tangible to kind of hold on to. And frankly, a lot of you and a lot of our customers, they depend heavily on beating their competitors to market. So if you're in the financial services industry, or you're in the retail industry, or in technology, it's about rolling out capabilities before your competitors do so you can gain greater market share. If you don't plan for the defects, or if you get more defects than you planned, you end up with this unplanned work, and it impacts your schedule. And there's only two ways, really only two things I think that people do to address that. One is they cut the scope, they reduce the scope before they release, or they put more resources at the problem and try to fix it while they're in the middle of the cycle there. And frankly, both cause problems, right? And cost more money than you'd expected. So Harvard Business Review tells us that 1 in 6 major projects, and I think major is sort of defined as roughly $1 million, overrun a schedule by 70%. I think we've all experienced projects overrunning schedules, and as program managers, we've all said, boy, how do we mitigate this risk? And we mitigate it by more people and or reduced functionality, which, by the way, doesn't thrill the users, right? It erodes your credibility with your users. And if you've got a time to market issue, now your users are your customers out there, and they're looking at your competitors saying, geez, they've got these new features, functions before you do. So there's a lot of impacts that happen at the business level as a result of these delays. And then finally, the dollars, and we've kind of alluded to the dollars, right? So we talk here at Lighthouse about these defects plus the delays equal dollars. And you know, obviously there's a tight relationship there that we really don't, I mean, everybody understands that, and we've all been involved in projects that overrun the budget. In fact, back to Harvard Business Review.
Spit that out.
Yeah. If you were in front of me right now, you'd be laughing. Again, 1 in 6 major projects, I think it's interesting, it's also 1 in 6, but it overruns by double. And I think that's also interesting. So if you've been in any major enterprise-wide projects, you've seen projects. You know, a few years ago, we got involved in a project where they were in year 5 of a 3-year project, and they were nowhere close to done, and because they misestimated how much work was there, and the organization wasn't designed to build systems from the ground up. They were designed to maintain and support COTS, commercial off-the-shelf systems, where they integrated, and they made a strategic decision and said, hey, instead of buying these COTS products, why don't we go build this from the ground up? We'll own it, we won't have to pay these license fees, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of organizations make that decision. The problem here is they didn't have the horsepower to go and architect a solution that worked well for them and their customers. And years of development happened when they planned a 3-year project. So how do we keep our projects on course? And you know, you'll laugh, right? Work smarter, not harder. We all hear that phrase, right? So for us, what does this mean? It really means applying a consistent testing methodology and tracking key metrics. Okay? So both consistency of your methodology and metrics, because although 60% of you are already tracking metrics, you've got to be making sure that these two things integrate together. And just another example, I guess, a few years ago we worked with a customer who had some process. When we asked the question, do you have development and testing processes, their answer was yes, but they were having difficulty getting products out the door on time and on budget. So as we dug into the organization, realized that although you do have some processes, they're not well defined and they're not consistently applied across the organization. So they engaged us to help them document their processes. It was a big organization, by the way, about I think 150 or 200 folks in development and test in the organization, but in different divisions. So they hired us to implement the process, help them implement processes, train their people, define the roles, and establish clear governance. So once we did that, and it took quite a long time to get through this process. Really, we started getting through it in about a year, and it kind of wrapped up almost in about 2 years in. They actually had doubled their productivity. So originally, they actually did measure productivity, and when we implemented and helped them implement all this capability change in the organization, they actually doubled productivity. But one of the nice things that happened that they didn't expect is before they implemented consistency in the methodology, everybody was working 50 to 55 hours a week. I mean, it was sporadic. People were burning out. It was a painful organization. But as we defined the governance and the roles better and worked through this consistency, an unexpected thing happened. Everybody's workload dropped to where people were working 40 to 45 hours a week now instead of 50 to 55. And unexpected, but really helped with everybody's work-life balance and, frankly, the culture there at the company. So let me move on here. We asked this poll. Oh, you have a question? Nope. Okay. We asked this poll already, so I'm going to skip ahead. So one thing we wanted you all to understand is that your methodology drives predictability, but it's your metrics that prove the improvement in your organization and give you credibility with your business owners and with your customers. So if you look at this graph here, you can see the area marked today. It shows a typical organization and how they perform once they start actually tracking both their plan versus their actual. And the orange line that you sort of see peeking out there says, hey, here's what our plan is. And the blue dots represent that, hey, every once in a while we come underrunning our plan, but most of the time today we're actually overrunning our plan. And your most project managers are managing cost and schedule where they're not looking at quality. And what we want you to understand is in a testing methodology, the testing manager is responsible for determining what's my planned quality look like. Is that delivered defects into production? Is it discovered defects that you want to discover during your system testing phase? So you've got to determine what are those key metrics that you want to establish and track to. For example, a current customer we're working with right now, retail customer, and they are trying to establish business level metrics. And it's interesting because the two business level metrics they're interested in are my page load time. So how long does it take to load a page? And so when my people come to buy from my site, how long is it taking? Well, it turns out for them, in peak, if it's not peak time, it loads in half a second. But at peak time, it's taken 12 to 15 seconds to load. And so you can imagine what happened at Christmas time where they're getting jammed up with peak time, and now it's taking people 12 to 15 seconds for a page to load. Everybody's leaving their site and going to buy from their competitor. The other thing they're looking at is order fulfillment mistakes. And so they're having integration problems, they realized, because 18% of the orders that customers made, they had to cancel the orders because they actually didn't have the product in-house. They thought they had the product in-house because they've got integration problems between their systems. They don't. They had to cancel those orders. Therefore, obviously, they lost the revenue and the margin, the profit from those orders. And frankly, probably torqued off quite a few customers. So these metrics don't have to be specific quality-based. They can really be business-oriented metrics. Okay? And as you move through time, and this chart paints for you here, you can see over time across the bottom as your testing process gets mature and as time progresses, your blue dots, if you will, come closer to your plan line. You get more predictable. And the cool thing about it is not only you get more predictable, but because you got a feedback loop of your metrics, you're actually improving, and your plan line is actually you're getting faster, you're getting more efficient, so your plan line is actually dropping. This isn't something that you can really accomplish in 3 or 4 months. It's a 12 to 24 month exercise that you'll need to go through in your organization. But frankly, and we've done this with a bunch of organizations, and I'm sure you have as well, It's really about your organization's willingness to change, okay? So you're really trying to improve how the organization's performing, but people have to be able to adopt change. And so you can see what can happen, and it has a major impact on your credibility as business leaders in your organization. So here's one of those key takeaways, and we'll remind you at the end, but what I'd recommend you do is pull out your pen and paper and write down these key takeaways. There's 3 or 4 of them through the presentation today that we think, if you're not doing it, and obviously 60% of you are, but I would ask you to challenge you and look at what is the plan and what are the actual key metrics you're looking at, okay? So what is the testing methodology? In our research, it really boils down to 3 key things: people, processes, and tools. All of that is the methodology, not just the process. So be careful there. The people are part of the methodology as well as the process and tools. We see a lot of companies and a lot of organizations think that they can find a silver bullet by buying a tool that will automate things and simplify things for them, but our experience proves that it really is investing in your people and training your people and educating them on consistency and processes that is going to make the biggest impact with your organization. With that, I want to turn this over to Julie, and Julie's going to really talk about what we call our True North testing methodology here at Lighthouse, and it's really to give you ideas inside your own methodology of things you might implement that might help you. Julie, you got the ball.
Thanks, Jeff. Hello, everyone. So I think we can all agree that these are good concepts that Jeff has talked through, but the reality of it is these things need to be applied, right? Because we all live in the real world and we're out there fighting the good fight every day. So we need actionable things that we can implement, and we had to do this at Lighthouse as well. So as Jeff mentioned, we just want to share with you some of our learnings and some of the things we've done, and hopefully that will give you some value in applying it within your own organization. Okay, so as always, it's people first. Those of you that have attended our events before, we say that a lot. So from recruiting and selection all the way through, evaluating and rewarding your people, it's critical. So let's spend some time walking through the pieces and parts here. So recruiting and selection, it's responsible for getting the right people into the right roles. So we believe that spending time there to put together an objective, and that's a key word, assessment process is key to success. So on the next slide, we'll share, some more detailed information about what we did here at Lighthouse in terms of an approach to solve that problem. But once you've got the people in the door, you're not done, right? I mean, there are really key important things to keeping those people and keeping that talent and adding that value to your organization. So
it's easy to think you're done, by the way,
exactly.
Because if you did a really good job recruiting, you found really good people who've got really good experience. They just don't know the way you do it. They don't know how your organization operates here. So
when it comes to training, most organizations seem to do a pretty good job at onboarding. They're great people, but that you have to orient them to your culture and the way that you do things, and we tend to do that. But then, our industry is a little crazy, and projects are crazy, and days and weeks and months go by, and you haven't provided ongoing training for your people. So I would challenge you to ask yourself, when's the last time I provided software testing training to my people, updated training? And you might be surprised when you really ask yourself that question, the answer that you come up with, because it's likely been a lot longer than you might have realized. So I caution you to pay attention to that.
And frankly, webinars like these can supply some kind of training for your team. So feel free to engage them, or if there's a particular webinar that we typically do and you want us to give it to your organization, just reach out to us. We're glad to do that.
Yeah, we're glad to. Think about whether or not your people feel empowered, and you might need to just ask them. Now, you've got to have an honest enough, trustworthy culture so that people feel safe in answering that question. But people, they want to add value. They want to have the freedom to do what they feel is right for the project, for the company, for the team. It's a motivating thing. So ask yourself whether or not you think your people really, first of all, are they empowered? And second, do they know they're empowered? Next, think about your evaluation process. I think we all do annual performance reviews, and I know a lot of us do a good job with quarterly objectives and measuring against those quarterly objectives. But consider taking it down to the project level. Our whole team, worked really hard on a specific project, and now the project's over. It's worth taking the time right then to evaluate, how'd we do? How'd the project leadership do? How did the engineers do? Give and receive open and honest feedback right then when it's timely and relevant is really the best way for the team to improve and get better, and that's the goal, is that we all continue to get better at what we're doing over time. And then lastly here, think about your reward system. So in alignment with evaluating your people, I'm sure you're doing merit increases and maybe, bonus structures and those kinds of things, but sometimes it just doesn't have to be fancy. A simple, hey, you know what, I've recognized that you've been working really hard and you did a really good job. Here's a gift card to the movies. Go spend some time with your family. People really appreciate that, more so than we might think. So again, I know some of you have heard us say this before, 65% of an organization's improvement comes from its people. So spending the time here is worth it. But back to selection and recruiting. So a couple of years ago here at Lighthouse, we found that we needed a more objective way to determine, I'll call it, which candidates had the greatest potential for success as a software tester. And that's about more than the technical skills that show up on somebody's resume and in an interview. We needed to understand attitude and aptitude related things as well. So we built an assessment process that we called the Gauntlet, which sounds a lot scarier than it really is, but it's just really fun to call it the Gauntlet.
Well, we have fun. I don't know. They might be scared.
They might be scared. I don't know. Maybe we should think about that in the future, but we have a lot of fun calling it the Gauntlet. But we built it in really two parts. And the first part was about that attitude and aptitude piece. So we wanted to get better at understanding, is the candidate detail-oriented? Do they follow a logical sequence of events? Do they like software testing? So believe it or not, people sit in jobs for a long time, and they might hate it. And if you hate it, you're likely only to ever be mediocre at it and never great at it. So those are the kinds of things that we wanted to better drive out of our assessment process for candidates. But the practical piece is important too. So there's a second part to our assessment that is more practical, that is assessing technical skills. So it's looking for things like, can the candidate find defects that we planted in a website? And can they write up those defects effectively? And can they write a good manual test case that would have identified one of those defects? So those are the pieces that make up our gauntlet. And I will say that the results have exceeded our expectations. So if you haven't considered something like that, then we recommend that you do.
Yeah, in fact, just to share that, so when she said they've exceeded our expectations, what it's done is shed some objective light on people, because the resumes of some people are fantastic, and frankly, some people are really good at interviewing and other people aren't.
Right.
And it's hard to get to the real truth, and this tool, or this series of tools, allows us that objectivity that has really helped us see through some maybe our own perceptions that have just added clarity for us.
Yeah. So Jeff talked about the key takeaways, things that you can write down if it's convenient for you right now, things you can do right away. So this key takeaway is evaluate your people. I've focused on new candidates, but it's really all your people. And that's something that we did once we got so excited about the results of our gauntlet and the candidate assessment process. we started having, some of our longtime test engineers take it, and the results and the information were enlightening and has allowed us to close gaps in people's skill sets and help them improve.
And there are a lot of personality tools out there, and you just have to tailor them and sort of weight sections of them based on what you need out of software testers, whether manual testers or test automators. And we're glad to talk in more detail about that with you if you want to give us a call sometime.
So let's move on to process. So 25% of an organization's improvement is right here. So 65% people, another 25% here in process. So you'll see things on this list that are, of course, very familiar to you. A lot of you are in QA and testing. A lot of these things are found in really every test process. But you'll see other things like inspections and code analysis that really occur more upstream and may or may not really be present in your organization or other organizations that you've been a part of. So we're not going to hit on all these things. We're going to instead focus on the things that we think make the biggest impact or that we often see missing or minimized within various organizations. So remember Jeff talked a lot about how sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
Everybody's snoozing.
About how defects cause unplanned rework, and that drives all kinds of problems, including a schedule problem. And it's defects that cause that unplanned rework, right? So the way we can avoid that, logically speaking then, is to find those defects as early as possible while their impact is still manageable. So down here in my graph, you can see we're early in the software development lifecycle. That's when the impact's the most manageable. The example here is $250 when you find and remove a defect in the phase where it was introduced, and the impact grows from there. So there's a couple of ways to do that, because remember, this is about, okay, how can I apply these concepts? So one of those is requirements or user story inspections. So if you aren't doing them today, I highly recommend that you consider it, because it gives you the opportunity to find and eliminate that defect in the work product itself before it propagates to later phases, to coding phases, testing phases, etc. Also, code analysis, very valuable here in this space, because it can tell you objectively where the code is the most fragile and or complex, therefore the most vulnerable to risk, and you can have that information before testing even starts. So it's a very proactive way versus a reactive way to, again, drive defects out as early as possible. And there are several good code analysis tools available commercially now. Didn't used to be, but now there are. So again, key takeaway, start inspecting. If you're not sure how to get started, again, give us a call. It's a very easy thing to implement and start using in your organization. Glad to have a conversation about it.
It does require rigor.
It does.
A lot of people do, and I'm doing air quotes here, peer reviews, and what happens is it's really not rigorous, it's not managed, and the results aren't tracked and documented, and a one-on-one peer review is significantly less effective than a many-on-one inspection that has a rigorous process applied to it. So we could talk for a long time about this, but because it's finding defects early in the life cycle, it has the #1 biggest impact on avoiding unplanned rework.
Right, and it's really not that costly to implement it within your organization. So there's a big ROI there. You got to get people in the right mindset, though, right? So everybody has to have the right attitude, and it's important to ground them in that before starting this process. It's not to, criticize your work or put your job in jeopardy or, any of those things. Okay, so the second item here under process that I want to hit on, because believe it or not, it's often, it might be missing or at a minimum minimized within an organization, is the test strategy. So the key here is that the test strategy should really be aligned with the organizational strategy. So let me give an example. So if an organization's strategy is to have faster time to market, maybe we're losing a little bit to our competitors, we're not getting our new technology out the door fast enough, we need faster time to market. The test organization then might define a strategy to increase test automation capability in support of that goal. You'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, I don't know, but I was surprised at how often we see those strategies get disconnected. So keep on top of that. Keep your eye on that and ensure that your test organization is well aligned with your overarching organizational strategy. Okay, so I'd like to spend some time talking about test planning now, because test planning is hard. And because it's hard, it's often a swag or a shot in the dark without, anything substantiating it. So I grew up, because I'm getting older, so I'll age myself, but I grew up in a waterfall world. So, often what happened was, the planning process was kind of taking a guess and saying, okay, the last 2 to 4 weeks of this project plan are going to be for the testing. Testers, figure it out, make it happen in 2 to 4 weeks. With nothing substantial to base that on, right? No idea if that was the right amount of time or not. So Agile helps a little bit. Agile's definitely an improvement, but what we see there is, somebody arbitrarily decides that 1 or 2 testers is the right amount to add to a sprint team with no idea of how much real testing work there is, and if 1 or 2 people can do that amount of work. So what we've done here is to put in place we call it metrics-based test planning. The key is that it's quantitative and is substantiated with real data, right? So it works better. So what you want to understand is how big is the solution under test, and there are ways of doing that, ways of measuring that. How much effort does it take to do that amount of testing work, and what's the quality level likely to be? So we look at certain pieces of data to help us answer those questions. So for how big is it, we look at function points. So I don't know, how familiar you are or not with function points, but at the 50,000 foot level, it's a way for us to measure how big is the solution that we need to test.
Back at the user story level.
Right, yep, all the way back there. Exactly. So then we want to understand, okay, now we know how big it is. How do we know how long it typically takes our team to do that amount of work? Well, we know because we've tracked metrics project by project, and now we have historical data that tells us it typically takes this team this amount of time to do this much work. And we can use that data now in our test planning. So we're not just guessing that it's 4 weeks. We've got real objective data to base that on. Now we want to be able to estimate, okay, what's the quality level likely to be, because that impacts our plan. Lower quality will cause more rework and more churn, and we want to plan for that as best we can from the beginning. So we know that if we are looking at a less mature development team as compared to a more mature development team, they're likely to inject more defects, causing more rework, and we can take that into account during our plan.
So what we've done here in our test planning is we've developed some algorithms through the years that let us forecast or predict what that quality level or how many defects we need to find during tests. So the team has an objective measure, again, metrics-based measure, right? That's redundantly redundant, but it's all about being objective here, so that we're not guessing anymore.
Okay, so now that we have a quantifiable plan, we're tracking metrics all the way through the test process to report against that plan kind of the whole way through. So what we've done here at Lighthouse is organized the metrics that we track into 4 different categories. So let me talk about those a little bit. So test progress is really the area that most people start with first if they haven't tracked test metrics before, and progress is just like it sounds. It's all about tracking actual to plan and the areas of how much did I say I was going to get done by this time, and how much did I get done? How many test cases do I have planned to execute, and how many did I get executed? So it's pretty basic but valuable if it's something that you're not already doing. Our second category here is quality. So that's all about getting visibility and transparency into the quality of the solution under test, as well as what's happening upstream, what's happening in the development team in terms of quality that might have an impact on our test plan and schedule, and what can we do now to mitigate that impact. So in that space, we are, of course, looking at things like how many defects have we found, what's the priority of them, et cetera, but we're also looking at things like, okay, how many have we found in comparison to how many we planned to find, and are we tracking at the right rate to be finished in the time frame that we thought we were going to be finished. Or we're looking at things like, okay, how long is it taking the development team to fix a defect once we've identified it? And is that in line with our plan? Or is it taking longer and therefore we need to adjust for that? So those two areas are the areas where most folks focus first if you're just getting started with the metrics program.
It's funny because some of you guys on here, we've been to your organizations and whiteboarded some of these things to talk about the impact of, hey, how long is it taking development, for example, to remediate these defects, because we're starting to fall behind. So you'll recognize these, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. These final two quadrants down here, efficiency and effectiveness, those are really more mature concepts. So you get to those, once you've had some time getting a metrics test reporting plan under your belt. But those are really all about team productivity, actual versus plan, and test effectiveness. And by test effectiveness, I mean, is the testing working? So maybe we're doing great. We're executing all the test cases we said we were going to, and we're on schedule, and our team's productivity is aligned. But what if we're not finding defects? That's a problem, right? Because the defects are likely to still be there. So those metrics are all about driving that out and reporting on, is the testing working, or do we need to change our test cases so that we're finding the amount of defects that we need to find.
Yeah, in fact, we have a whole webinar and a roundtable series on metrics specific to get into the details of these metrics if you're interested at some point in time.
So it's a continuous feedback loop. So tracking all of these metrics allows us to plan better in the future, right? So we become more consistent, more predictable, and we get better over time.
Just like that earlier graph.
Just like that. So the key takeaway here is that if you're not tracking any metrics, just get started. And you can start, simple. Start with progress metrics. Organizations generally have that data. You generally know how many did I plan to do and how many have I done. So just start there and grow your maturity from that starting point.
And one of the key ones that I like is tracking how many production level defects showed up within 90 days of release. That'll really give you a sense of the quality. You don't expect it to be zero because it's really expensive to reduce it to zero, but you don't want it to be 1,000 defects either, depending on the number of users you have out there. So, yeah. Okay,
so I'm going to slide out of process now and move into tools. So tools are responsible generally for about only 10% of your improvement, and you can guess why. Like, I'm sure you've all seen tools implemented with no process behind it, not the right people in the organization, and they sit on shelves. So you spend a bunch of money and they sit on shelves. So, watch that, right? But if you're ready for tools, if you've got your people and process under control, these are some good tools to consider. So we talked about code analysis and the power of that. Again, there are a lot of commercially available code analysis tools out there. Metrics dashboards. So one thing I didn't say when we were talking about metrics is how do you get all this data and what do you do with it and how do you generate these metrics? Well, we built a dashboard. We did it on top of a commercially available tool. It's Jira. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it. So that's a way to solve that problem. Various test management and defect tracking tools available out there if your organization is ready for them. And then lastly, don't forget test automation. There's a wide range of maturity out there in terms of the test automation journey. But if you're agile in particular and you haven't considered it, consider it, because manual testing very quickly becomes a sprint bottleneck because of the regression. The manual testers it becomes impossible to keep up. So think about that if you're agile or moving to agile.
And we have another webinar series on that.
We
Sorry.
do, right? Lots of webinars. So watch your email for those webinar series coming out. So we're going to start wrapping up here with how do you just get started. So I encourage you to have a big vision, but start small. Organizations can only absorb change at a certain rate. I think Jeff alluded to that earlier. So start by knowing what your goals are. Keep them realistic. Keep them measurable. And then know that it's really hard to achieve those goals if you don't know where you're starting from. So one way to just know where you are is to consider an objective assessment. We see those done internally. We see them done externally. It's hard to do them internally because it's hard to be objective when it's your organization and you're so close to it. And you might not have the skill set within your organization to administer an assessment, but I think it's important to understand where you're starting from when you start any journey of improvement via a roadmap. So when you have a roadmap to improvement, because you know where you are and you know where you're trying to go, make sure it includes key metrics like we've talked about all along, plan versus actual, so that you can show improvement over time. Otherwise, you don't know if you're getting better, and in our graph down here, you won't know if your projects are getting more predictable and more consistent if you're not measuring your improvement along the way.
So you take that customer, for example, that I talked about, the e-commerce customer. If at peak it's taken them 12 to 15 seconds to load, that's going to be one of those blue dots. And over time, they're making changes to the system and optimizing the system. They're going to measure that over time, right? And you're going to see those dots hopefully get closer to their plan line of, half a second or something.
So let's review, because we talked about a lot of things. So we started by grounding ourselves with what we at Lighthouse call the 3 perils of software development: defects, delays, and dollars, blowing our projects up. Then we talked about a testing methodology and the value of a methodology. We talked about a metrics-based approach, right, to prove the improvement. So you not only need to improve, but you need to prove that over time.
This is about credibility, okay?
Yes.
When I was in an organization, we got beat up all the time because managers always want more for less, right? And this is your way to defend your argument, to defend yourself, is track this, set some goals, and show your improvement. And it's going to give you instant credibility as soon as you start doing it.
And then remember people first. I spent a lot of time on that people chart, and that is by design. 65% improvement from your people. Then process, then tools. So we had those blue boxes popping up, those key takeaways. I want to really make sure you have these, because these are the things that allow you to make a difference right away. So tracking plan versus actuals, evaluating your people, start inspecting, and getting started with metrics. And I'll say, again, give us a call. We're glad to talk with you about getting started in any of those areas. And we will open the floor for questions.
Okay, so back to me. I'm sure you all missed me. So we do have a few questions. The first question is regarding the plan versus test process maturity graph that Jeff discussed. And the question is, what is the basis for this graph, and where did you get the information from?
So good question. That graph is intended to show, depending on what the metric is that you're tracking, you're going to build that graph multiple times over. So if you're tracking how many test cases I plan to execute versus I actually executed, you're going to get that graph and see that graph over time. If you're tracking, like I used the example with the e-commerce customer, if you're tracking how long it's taking for a page to load on average, you're going to track that. It's going to be a separate graph. So you're going to end up with a bunch of these graphs. You're not going to, the goal here is not to track 50 things, right? Pick 3 or 5 things that are critical for today for your organization, and begin to graph. Okay.
If the question is why we portray it is with only a couple of items actually coming in near or below plan, and most of them coming above, That's really based on our experience over the last 16 years. That's what we've seen occur in organization after organization after organization.
Yeah, how often do you actually come in under plan and get it done early with a high level of quality? Yeah. Okay, good.
Okay.
Hopefully that answered your question.
The next question is, how do I align the testing organization's strategy with the organizational strategy of the business, and do you have an example?
So it's first about making sure that you understand what the overarching organization's goals are, right? So the example that we talked through was around faster time to market. So every organization then within the company should be doing whatever they can do to enable faster time to market. And in the testing area, one way to do that might be to introduce a test automation strategy. Other ways to do that.
Right. Well, I mean, if you take again, back to the e-commerce customer of ours, if you take the fulfillment problem they're having, so a business person in the organization identified that problem, said, holy heck, we keep canceling orders here. What are we doing about that, right? And so code analysis tools can point to high-risk areas of the code that once you start mucking with that code, you're likely to break other things. So there are specific things you can do to roll down those objectives from the corporate level into the IT organization at the CIO level, and then from the IT organization down to your testing organization or your development organization, as the case may be. But really, as Julie said, it's about knowing what they are and flowing them down.
Right, and the point really was they get disconnected quickly.
Really quickly.
Really quickly, right? So you just got to keep your eye on that ball,
right,
to make sure that you stay aligned.
And frankly, set up a reward system for your team to improve that metric, so that you're showing your boss and they can show their boss that you've got organizational alignment here.
Okay, the next question is, what do you look for in potential employees, and how does your gauntlet assessment measure them?
So we look for traits that again, over the last 16 years, the traits we have found in our most successful software testers.
Yeah.
So those traits have been things like attention to detail, things like curiosity, not being willing to accept something the way that it looks on the surface. Well, that feels wrong, so you know what, it probably is.
They challenge the status quo.
Right. I'm going to dig into that area a little bit. We're looking for those kinds of key personality traits, and you've got to have a certain kind of attitude to be that kind of person, right? If you're really, really passive and you don't want to challenge the status quo, your likelihood of being successful in this role might be lower than somebody else's. But there's no kind of one thing. It's a combination of things.
Yeah, in fact, we used our what we judged internally is our best testers as we tweaked the personality tests to weight different areas of personality traits to make sure it mimicked our best testers. So that, just for what it's worth, that's what we would recommend, and that's how we went about it. So.
Okay, awesome. So it appears that we have answered all of the questions. Great job, Julie and Jeff. So on behalf of everyone here at Lighthouse, I want to thank you all for attending this webinar. But before we go, up on your screen, you'll see the next 2 webinars that we will be hosting. So next month we will be hosting a webinar on software quality and e-commerce, and then in March we will be hosting a webinar on the hidden costs of offshore outsourcing. So please be on the lookout for some email invites on those, and we hope that you are all able to attend and that you will find both of those topics very interesting, because I know that we do. But for now, our team is standing by to answer any of your questions and field any of your calls. Our main number here at Lighthouse is 937-458-0055, and you can reach Julie at extension 328, or you can reach Jeff at extension 201. And again, the number here is 937-458-0055. And like I said, you can speak with Jeff and Julie at your earliest convenience. And we look forward to hearing from you all and hope you have a really great day. And thank you again for attending.
Thanks everyone.